Remember when flying felt like a real privilege? You'd board a plane and it was an unforgettable experience. Polished uniforms, delicious meals on real plates, and enough legroom to actually stretch. For many of us, the flight was as memorable as the destination itself. Fast forward to today, and the picture looks very different. Delays drag on for hours, cabins feel tighter than ever, and airlines nickel and dime you for things that used to be free. The charm has gone, but the price tag only grew. So here's the real question: in today's skies, which airlines still make flying feel worth it? And which ones have fallen so far they're almost unrecognizable? We've ranked 15 major airlines, from the biggest disappointments to the few that still make flying feel special. And let me tell you, starting at number 15 is a name that will shock you. Or maybe it won't. 15. American Airlines. There was a time when flying American Airlines actually meant something. Their silver jets with the bold red and blue stripes weren't just planes, they were symbols of American travel itself. Families crossing the country for the first time, business travelers trusting them as the standard bearer, even Hollywood stars boarding an American jet in the 60s and 70s. Back then, you felt a sense of pride stepping on board. But today, that pride has slipped into frustration. American is no longer the flag carrier in spirit. It's a patchwork of overbooking, shrinking seats, and a loyalty program that many travelers feel has lost its value. Delays are common, crews feel overstretched, and meals in economy often make people wonder if the word meal is even appropriate anymore. A journey that once felt like an experience now feels like endurance. One frequent flyer put it bluntly: American has become Greyhound with wings. Another shared how a simple coast-to-coast trip turned into a 2-day ordeal, complete with lost luggage and hours of silence from customer service. And that's the real sting. Not just the operational issues, but the feeling that passengers are no longer treated as guests, only as ticket numbers. It hurts more because of what American once represented. This isn't some budget airline where you expect to sacrifice comfort. This was supposed to be America's pride in the skies. Instead, many loyal flyers now find themselves switching to competitors who still seem to remember what service means. And what about you? Was your experience with American Airlines anything like the one I just described, or totally different? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And now, let's move on to another airline that nearly escaped the bottom spot. What's the matter there? 14. Spirit Airlines. If American feels like a broken promise, Spirit never even tried to make one. For many travelers, boarding a Spirit flight isn't so much travel as it is survival. The bright yellow planes might look cheerful on the outside, but inside, you'll quickly discover why so many seasoned flyers call it the bus of the skies. Spirit pioneered the ultra-low-cost model in the US, and at first glance it seems tempting. A ticket so cheap it almost feels like a mistake. But then the add-ons start rolling in. Want to bring a carry-on? Pay up. Need to choose your seat? That'll cost more. Even a bottle of water can feel like a small fortune. By the time you've paid for the basics, the deal doesn't look much like one. And that's before the real headaches. Overstuffed flights, seats that feel closer to medieval torture devices than actual chairs, and a reputation for delays that's nearly legendary. Passengers often describe the boarding process as chaos, no clear communication, endless arguments over baggage fees, and a general feeling that everyone, staff included, just wants the whole ordeal to be over. Yet here's the irony. Spirit keeps flying because there's always someone willing to trade comfort for cost. For a short hop, maybe it works, but ask anyone who's been stranded overnight with nothing but a plastic chair for company. Cheap suddenly feels very expensive. Let's move on to the next airline on the list, a name you've probably heard countless stories about, and yet it's still the most popular airline in Europe. Do you already know which one it is? 13. Ryanair. If Spirit is America's cautionary tale, Ryanair is Europe's. This airline turned flying into a kind of endurance sport, where the goal isn't comfort or service, but simply surviving the journey. For millions, it's the only way to get across the continent cheaply, but ask anyone who's flown them more than once, and you'll hear the same refrain: never again. Until the next €9 sale, Ryanair built its empire on brutal efficiency. They land planes, unload passengers, and get airborne again faster than most people can make a cup of coffee. But that speed comes at a cost. Boarding feels like herding cattle. The seats are so cramped, you'll swear the designer hated human knees, and the constant barrage of in-flight sales, lottery tickets, perfumes, scratch cards makes the cabin feel more like a traveling bazaar than an airline. And then there's the infamous nickel and diming. Forget free bags or even a free smile. At one point, the CEO half-jokingly suggested charging passengers to use the bathroom. And the sad part is, nobody doubted him. Yet here's the contradiction. Ryanair gets you there, usually on time, for next to nothing. For backpackers and budget travelers, that trade-off is worth it. But for anyone chasing even a hint of dignity in the skies, this is the bottom rung. But Europe doesn't have a monopoly on painful budget flying. Do you know which U.S. airline shares the same reputation? We're about to find out. 12. Frontier Airlines. There was a time when low cost just meant no free meal, maybe no pillow. Frontier redefined that term, and not in a good way. Today, it's become the airline people book once and then warn their friends about forever. You'll see the deals. $19 fares splashed across the website like a golden ticket. But by the time you've added a seat, a carry-on, maybe even the privilege of sitting next to your kid, that miracle fare looks a whole lot like a regular ticket on a better airline. The experience on board doesn't redeem it either. Paper-thin seats with no recline, no screens, and no power outlets make even short flights feel endless. The staff? Often painted as exhausted and stretched thin because the airline squeezes every cost it can. It feels transactional, not human. Other low-cost carriers at least try to soften the blow with a touch of humor or friendliness. Frontier doesn't. It's an assembly line in the sky. Efficient, yes. Enjoyable? Almost never. So in the last two cases, the lack of comfort was mostly the issue. But with the next one, the problem shifts to something else: consistency. Can you really trust an airline you never know what to expect from? In some situations, especially if you live in a small city, maybe you have to. 11. Allegiant Air. Flying is supposed to reduce stress, not create it. But with Allegiant, many travelers feel like they're rolling dice every time they book a ticket. The airline built its business model around one idea: cheap direct flights from small-town America to vacation spots like Las Vegas, Orlando, or Phoenix. For people living far from big city airports, Allegiant can feel like the only option. And on paper, that sounds great. Low fares, no connections, just hop on and go. The reality, however, is less comforting. Allegiant operates one of the oldest fleets in the United States, with planes that average over 20 years in service. Older aircraft don't automatically mean unsafe, but when combined with a history of mechanical incidents and cancellations, passengers start to worry. A CBS 60 Minutes investigation in 2016 revealed Allegiant had an unusually high number of emergency landings and mid-air problems compared to its peers. Even if safety standards have since improved, that reputation is hard to shake. Then there's the reliability issue. Allegiant doesn't run multiple flights a day on most routes. Sometimes it's only 2 or 3 a week. That means if your flight gets canceled, you're not rebooked on the next departure in a few hours. You could be stranded for days. Add to that the endless list of fees, carry-on luggage, seat assignments, even printing a boarding pass at the airport, and the cheap tickets suddenly looks less like a bargain and more like a risky bet. Allegiant may feel like a gamble, a scrappy airline filling gaps for small towns. But the next carrier is the opposite story. Founded over a century ago, once the pride of American aviation, and proof that even giants can fall from grace. You probably already know which airline this is, don't you? 10. United Airlines. There was a time when United Airlines stood as the gold standard for American business travel. Polished uniforms, lounges that felt like private clubs, even small touches like warm meals served with silverware. United was the airline corporate America trusted. If you were flying coast to coast for work, odds were high you were flying United. It was synonymous with reliability and prestige, but the shine wore off. In the past decade, United has become a case study in how quickly an airline can squander goodwill. High-profile scandals, like the infamous passenger dragging incident in 2017, still cast a long shadow. Add in long delays, inconsistent service, and the sense that crews are stretched thin, and it's no wonder many former loyalists have jumped ship. The airline that once promised Polish now too often feels indifferent. That said, United isn't Spirit or Frontier. You still get a global route network that smaller carriers can't touch. Mileage Plus, while not as generous as it used to be, remains one of the better programs for frequent international travelers. And when United gets it right, particularly on newer long-haul aircraft, the experience can still feel a cut above the bargain bin budget airlines dragging the bottom of this list. The frustration comes from the gap between what United used to be and what it often delivers today. Boarding a flight from Newark to San Francisco shouldn't feel like stepping onto a tired bus with wings, but too many passengers describe exactly that. And yet, unlike Allegiant's gamble or Spirit's nickel and diming circus, United still has the resources and scale to do better. That's what makes it so maddening. It's not the worst of the skies, far from it. But for an airline that once symbolized American business travel, being merely not the worst feels like a steep fall. United's decline feels like wasted potential, but the next airline isn't just about poor service. It carries the weight of history itself. Once a global symbol of Soviet power, yet today it's only a shadow of what it used to be. 9. Aeroflot. Back in the Cold War era, Aeroflot wasn't just an airline, it was the Soviet Union's global calling card. At its peak, it was the largest airline in the world, operating thousands of aircraft across Asia, Africa, Europe, and every corner of the Soviet Union. Boarding an Aeroflot jet carried weight. It wasn't just travel, it was political theater, a stage where the Soviet Union projected its power. Fast forward to today, and that grandeur feels more like faded wallpaper. Sanctions have cut off Aeroflot's access to Western aircraft and parts, leaving the airline increasingly reliant on older fleets and homegrown designs. Routes once sprawling across continents have shrunk. For most international travelers, Aeroflot is no longer a choice. It's a relic of another era. But unlike United, Aeroflot's struggles are about more than service inconsistency. They're tied to geopolitics, legacy, and the weight of history. Even before sanctions, Aeroflot was unpredictable. Service could be warm and surprisingly professional on one flight, then curt and indifferent on the next. You might board a modern Airbus on Monday, then find yourself in a creaky Soviet-era model by Friday. That unpredictability always gave Aeroflot a unique, if uneasy, character. And here's the paradox. Within Russia, Aeroflot still commands a strange reverence. For generations, it was the first passport to the wider world, carrying students abroad, reuniting families, or whisking vacationers to the Black Sea. That cultural imprint keeps it alive in the national identity in a way airlines like Spirit or Frontier could never dream of. From Russia's tale of geopolitics and history, we turn to India, where flying once meant elegance and ceremony. If Aeroflot represented power, this next airline represented pride and hospitality. For many travelers, it offered an experience that felt closer to a cultural showcase than just a journey. 8. Air India. There was a time when stepping onto an Air India flight felt like entering a palace in the sky. Founded in 1932 and guided by the vision of J.R.D. Tata, it embodied refinement and hospitality. Passengers were welcomed with warm service, polished uniforms, and food that carried a touch of India's richness. For many Western travelers, it was a revelation. Flying Air India was like being invited to a banquet at 30,000 feet. It wasn't just an airline, it was a cultural ambassador. But as decades passed, the palace doors creaked. Air India developed a reputation for chronic delays, outdated cabins, and service that too often fell short of its proud history. Complaints about malfunctioning entertainment screens, dirty restrooms, and broken seats became far too common. Instead of luxury, passengers were left with frustration. Boarding Air India in recent years has felt less like a royal welcome and more like lining up in a bureaucratic waiting hall suspended in the clouds. The reasons go deeper than service lapses. For years, state ownership weighed the airline down with inefficiency, political meddling, and decisions that ignored passengers. Rivals across the Gulf, Emirates, Qatar, Etihad, built gleaming fleets and flawless reputations, while Air India seemed stuck in the past, eroding its once shining crown. And yet, the story isn't finished. In 2022, the Tata Group, the same family that built Air India in the first place, took back the reins. The move sparked real optimism, massive new aircraft orders, modernization plans, and promises of restored service hint at a possible rebirth. It won't be instant, but the seeds of revival are planted. Air India's story is one of global ambition, legacy, and the hope of revival under new leadership. The next airline, by contrast, started not as a national flag carrier, but as a hometown favorite in Minnesota. For a while, it carried local pride just as strongly as Air India carried cultural identity. Do you know the name already? 7. Sun Country. In Minnesota, Sun Country has always been something more than a name on a ticket. From its early days, it grew into a hometown hero, a symbol of Midwest friendliness and practicality that passengers could count on. For families escaping harsh winters to Florida, for honeymooners heading to Las Vegas, or simply for locals who liked seeing their own airline go head-to-head with the national giants, Sun Country was a point of pride. Flying with it often felt like being welcomed by a neighbor, not processed by a corporation. Over the years, the airline changed. In an effort to stay competitive, Sun Country shifted toward the ultra-low-cost model that reshaped much of the industry. That brought tighter seating, new fees, and some of the personal touches fading into memory. For many loyal passengers, it was bittersweet to watch an airline that once stood out for warmth and generosity adopt the same playbook as the no-frills competition. Outsourcing customer service overseas only deepened that impression, particularly when bad weather in Minneapolis left travelers waiting for hours without answers. And yet, Sun Country remains different. Unlike many low-cost carriers, it has stayed true to a specific mission, connecting Minnesota and the Midwest to sunny leisure destinations. Its network may not span the globe, but it offers direct routes to the places its customers most want to go. On the right day, with a smooth departure and a friendly crew, the old spark of what made Sun Country beloved still shines through. Sun Country's story is about how a small hometown airline lost the charm that once set it apart. The next one couldn't be more different. A flag carrier that built its reputation on elegance, tradition, and global reach. For decades, it sold not just flights, but an image of Britain itself. Number 6. British Airways. There was an era when flying British Airways wasn't just a trip, it was a rite of passage. Crossing the Atlantic in those navy blue seats meant you were in good hands. The uniforms, the accents, the little touches like afternoon tea service. BA sold an image of British elegance, and for decades, it delivered. For many American travelers, their first flight to Europe came on a BA jet, and it felt like stepping into another world. But prestige is fragile. Over the past 2 decades, British Airways has gone through wave after wave of cost-cutting. Long-haul economy meals that once felt carefully prepared have been replaced with uninspired trays. Business class, once a benchmark, has been outpaced by competitors like Qatar, Emirates, and even Virgin Atlantic. Frequent flyers who once swore loyalty to BA now describe it as fine, but not what it used to be. Still, let's be clear, BA hasn't sunk to the level of Spirit or Ryanair. The airline remains a true global carrier, with a network that rivals almost anyone. Its lounges in Heathrow still offer a touch of class, and when BA gets it right, the service can remind you of why it was once the world's favorite airline. The problem isn't that BA is bad, the problem is that so many others raised the bar higher while BA seemed content to rest on its legacy. British Airways made its mark with charm and tradition, even if some of that shine has faded. Our next airline, however, built its reputation on something else entirely: Precision. For years, it was the very definition of reliability in the skies. The question now is whether that reputation still holds true. 5. Lufthansa. For decades, Lufthansa was the gold standard of European air travel. German precision wasn't just a stereotype, it was the brand promise. If you wanted punctuality, reliability, and understated efficiency, you booked Lufthansa. The cabins were clean, the service professional, and delays were the exception, not the rule. Flying with them once carried the quiet reassurance that nothing would go wrong. But in recent years, that myth of flawless efficiency has started to show cracks. Strikes have become a recurring headline, grounding thousands of passengers and straining loyalty. Staffing cuts after the pandemic left flights short-handed, and even premium customers began to notice corners being cut. Once famous German punctuality has slipped, with Lufthansa ranking below average on-time performance in several major reports. For travelers used to absolute dependability, that's a betrayal of the brand's DNA. The product itself hasn't been immune either. Economy cabins often feel dated compared to rivals, and business class seating, once considered cutting edge, now lags behind the innovations from Middle Eastern and Asian carriers. Passengers who once bragged about flying Lufthansa now sometimes describe the experience as good enough rather than exceptional. That's a big shift for a company that once symbolized aviation excellence. Still, it's worth noting, Lufthansa hasn't fallen into the chaos of budget airlines or the inconsistency of Aeroflot and Air India. It remains a true global powerhouse with a vast network, membership in the Star Alliance, and hubs that connect the world. For many business travelers, Lufthansa is still the logical choice, but the cracks in the armor remind us that even giants can stumble. Lufthansa shows what happens when an old giant starts to lose some of its shine. Respected but no longer untouchable. Our next airline couldn't be more different. A newcomer that burst onto the scene promising to shake up everything passengers hated about flying. And for a while, it actually delivered. But can any airline really keep that promise? 4. JetBlue. When JetBlue first took to the skies in 2000, it felt like a revolution. Free seatback TVs, generous legroom, friendly staff, and snacks that didn't taste like an afterthought. Suddenly, flying a domestic airline in the US was fun again. For passengers who had grown tired of American United and Delta treating them like cargo, JetBlue was the fresh alternative. It promised big airline reliability with boutique airline charm. And here's the thing, much of that promise still shines through today. JetBlue consistently ranks higher than its legacy rivals when it comes to customer satisfaction. Economy seats are still more spacious, free Wi-Fi is a standard perk, and the overall vibe of a JetBlue flight feels lighter, more human than boarding many competitors. For travelers hopping from New York to Florida or Boston to California, JetBlue is still the least painful way to get there. Of course, no airline is perfect. As JetBlue has expanded, some of its polish has faded. Service isn't always as consistent as it once was, and recent attempts at mergers have left some loyal fans worried about the future. But compared to the nickel and dime experience of Spirit or the weary disappointment of United, JetBlue still feels like a breath of fresh air. JetBlue lands here not because it's perfect, but because it still manages to deliver more than most of the American pack. Ask frequent flyers which U.S. airline they'd rather be stuck on during a delay, and 9 times out of 10, JetBlue is the answer. With JetBlue, we close out the middle of the pack. Now it's time for the top 3, the airlines that, for better or worse, still stand apart from the rest. And leading off this final stretch is the U.S. carrier many consider the nation's best. Ready to see which one actually gets it right? 3. Delta Airlines among U.S. carriers. One name consistently rises above the rest: Delta. While American and United often dominate headlines for the wrong reasons, Delta quietly built a reputation as the airline that still remembers how to take care of its passengers. For many frequent flyers, it's the one American airline they actually choose rather than simply tolerate. Why? It comes down to consistency. Delta's fleet is among the youngest of the U.S. majors, which means cleaner cabins, fresher interiors, and fewer mechanical delays. Flight attendants, while not perfect, tend to earn higher marks for professionalism and friendliness compared to rivals. And on-time performance? Delta routinely ranks near the top, making it the dependable option when your schedule really matters. Even the little touches add up. Delta's app is one of the best in the industry, offering seamless check-in and rebooking options that save travelers from long, frustrating lines. Their SkyMiles loyalty program, while not without flaws, is still seen as more rewarding than many competitors. And lounges like the Delta Sky Club have become sanctuaries for weary travelers stuck in crowded terminals. Of course, Delta isn't without its critics. Ticket prices can run higher than rivals, and on some routes, that premium doesn't always feel justified. Snack offerings and economy class service won't wow anyone when compared to Asian or Middle Eastern carriers. But when the alternative is another grueling flight on American or United, paying a little extra for Delta often feels like money well spent. That's why Delta holds this spot. It's the closest thing the U.S. has left to an airline that respects passengers the way they should be respected. It may not bring back the golden age of flying, but it gives travelers a glimpse of what it once felt like. Delta may be the last stronghold in the U.S., but step outside America and the competition looks very different. Our next airline isn't just better than its rivals. It's the one many say still carries the magic of flying itself. Ready to see what world-class really looks like? Part 2. Singapore Airlines. If there's one airline that still carries the spirit of aviation's golden age, it's Singapore Airlines. From the moment you step on board, the atmosphere feels different. Calmer, more refined, more human. Where other airlines treat service as a checklist, Singapore treats it as an art form. The iconic sarong-clad flight attendants aren't just a brand image. They embody the elegance and professionalism that made flying glamorous in the first place. The details matter here. Meals aren't just meals. They're carefully curated dining experiences, with menus designed by world-class chefs and even the option to pre-order your dish. Cabins are immaculate, entertainment systems state-of-the-art, and whether you're flying economy or first class, there's a sense that the airline cares about how you feel. For many passengers, it's the closest thing to traveling back in time, to when airlines competed to make flying joyful, not tolerable. Singapore Airlines also sets the bar for innovation. It was one of the first to introduce seat-back entertainment screens for every passenger, and it continues to pioneer new cabin designs that maximize both comfort and privacy. Even as aviation has become more about efficiency than experience, Singapore never abandoned the principle that service is what makes people come back. It's no surprise that the airline consistently wins awards for the best in the world. While US and European carriers struggle to meet basic expectations, Singapore quietly reminds us what world-class really means. For frequent travelers, it's not just a flight, it's the one booking you actually look forward to. Singapore Airlines shows us that the old magic of flying can still exist, but number one on this list doesn't just preserve tradition, it reinvents the very idea of what air travel can be. This is the airline that turned luxury into its brand and made the world stop and take notice. Any guesses? Number 1. Emirates. If Singapore Airlines keeps the golden age alive, Emirates redefines what the next age of flying can be. From its base in Dubai, Emirates built a reputation not just as an airline, but as a symbol of modern luxury in the skies. It took the idea that flying should feel special and doubled down, creating experiences that make you forget you're even in transit. Step into an Emirates cabin and the difference is immediate. Even in economy, the seats feel roomier than many competitors' premium cabins. Entertainment screens are massive, with a library so vast you could fly around the world twice and never run out of options. Flight attendants strike that perfect balance of warm and professional, making you feel like more than just a seat number. But it's in the premium cabins where Emirates truly soars. Business class offers lie-flat comfort paired with hospitality that feels personal, not transactional. First class, with its private suites and even onboard showers, has become the stuff of legend. Travelers who've experienced it describe it as less like flying and more like staying in a five-star hotel at 40,000 feet. Emirates also reshaped global travel through its Dubai hub. Instead of seeing geography as a limitation, it turned the city into a crossroads of the world. Suddenly, connections between Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas felt seamless. The strategy worked. Emirates is now a household name even in countries where it doesn't originate. Instead of clinging to nostalgia, Emirates writes its own chapter, one where flying is thrilling again, not exhausting. It's a reminder that air travel doesn't have to be a compromise. For anyone who has grown tired of cramped seats, stale service, and airlines that treat passengers like afterthoughts, stepping onto an Emirates flight feels like rediscovering the wonder of the journey itself. In a world where most airlines have forgotten the magic, Emirates keeps it alive and shows us what the skies can still be. So there it is, from the bottom of the skies to the airlines still keeping the magic alive. Did we nail it, or did we miss your favorite carrier? Drop your best or worst flying story in the comments. Thanks for watching, and remember, never settle for a miserable flight.